So welcome back, everyone. After the delay in the share, this will be the last share until after Pesach. So I'm just going to try and pack in as much as I can in this time. And the share has been very kindly sponsored. Le'ilui Nishmas Karen's father, thank you for that. Rafal Moshe Ben Yosef. I think the outside is tonight with Shichai Maruchim and Lachama. And Jeffrey's father, thank you for sponsoring. Kalman Yitzhak Ben Nachum Mendel Halevi. His outside is today, is that right? Yeah. So I wish you both, wish you both Chamarochim and Mitzvah Hashem. This share should be a fitting Eloi Neshama for both of them. The truth is, there are always sponsorship opportunities available. You didn't need to sponsor it because your being here is the Eloi Neshama, but more than anything else. So sponsorship is if one's unable to attend, but if one's actually gathered and learning Torah, what better Eloi Neshama could that be? So, but nonetheless, thank you for the kind sponsorship. So I wanted today to speak about Bittul Kli MeHechano. So I'm not actually going to, given that we've had quite a long delay, I'm not going to use today's share for working through the Gemara itself. I'm just going to try and speak conceptually because I just want to sort of try and give the concepts that underlie the sugya. So Bittul Kli MeHechano, what is Bittul Kli MeHechano? So we're learning the second mahalach in the Gemara really, the mahalach on Mem Gimel Amud Aleph, in which the Rav Yosef says that the reason of Rav Chisda is because of the prohibition of Bittul Kli MeHechano. So what's wrong with being Mevatel Kli MeHechano? So we have a number of hesperim in this. In fact, I think 4 really that come out of the sources that I gave, 4 or arguably 3, depending how you read the sources. So Rashi on the Mishnah says that the problem is that you are kavei alo makom, you're fixing for it a place. And therefore, this is domi l'melacha. This is similar to a melacha, which seems to mean boina, fixing something in its place seems to be the melacha of boina. So that's one maramakam. Then we have a number of Rashis which seem to imply that it is sosa. I think I printed most of them here. Tosfos himself, by the way, picks up on the issue in Rashi. There's Rashi in Kuchach Chesam Beis. Rashi says it's domi l'soisa. Things like stira with building. There's Rashi in Kufnun Dalad on the base who says he says that it's similar to soisa. So Rashi there seems to say that it's soisa rather than boina. By the way, as an aside, there's a bit of a halachic discussion around Rashi's saying it's boina. This I'm not going to go into this now, but when we last Zaman, when we were still learning the small malachas, not small malachas, when we were learning the short malachas, we had a discussion about whether yesh binyan b'kedim or ein binyan b'kedim. So here Rashi says that the malacha is boina, but it's quite possible that ein binyan binyan b'kedim, in which case you'd have to say that, and there's also been a discussion whether the stira b'kedim, by the way, a parallel discussion around that, whether yesh ein stira b'kedim. And you'll have to say that Rashi means it's a drabonon, a double drabonon. In other words, even binyan and stira b'kedim might be drabonon. Remember what we discussed there, whether Rashi holds ein binyan b'kedim or yesh binyan b'kedim, and this is a double drabonon of binyan or stira. Making something Muktza is like boina and soisa, and boina and soisa itself is a drabonon on kedim. Sorry, it's not. No, melachas boina is a deraisa, one of the lamitas melachas. But whether boina only applies with utensils. The truth is that given that you're pushing this, let me just clarify this a little bit. When we say there's binyan and stira with kelim, we mean the construction of the keli itself and the destruction of the keli itself. So when you fix a keli in its place, you're not. When Rashi says it's boina, you're not constructing the keli. He says you're attaching the keli to its place. So that probably everyone would agree is boina. That probably wouldn't be a question. The better way to formulate the question is sosa, because when you're fixing something in its place, Rashi says you're making it unusable. You're making it Muktza makes it unusable, and therefore that's sosa. Now the sosa that's taking place is the destruction of the functionality of the keli itself. So there you have the better question, that if there's no stira with kelim, how can it be that fixing a keli and removing its functionality is sosa? You're the dismantling of the functionality. Again, boina means creating a functionality by joining pieces. Sosa means losing functionality. joining pieces together to make a building is boina. Joining pieces together to make a keli, which is a lesser form of functionality, it's just an implement, utensil, is a machlokas. That's what we saw previously. When Rashi says it's boina by fixing the keli in its place, it doesn't mean it's boina that you're making the keli, you're not. It means it's boina that you're constructing something, so that we could see that maybe even those who hold ein bin keli would agree it's boina. But sosa is you're removing the functionality of the keli. Removing a functionality is sosa and chora in stira b'kedim. So that's a question. There's another question which is.
But in Boned, Rashi says it's dummy lebon, it's dummy lemalacha. He doesn't think it's not Boned itself, it's dummy lemalacha.
So it's certainly only dummy lemalacha because you're not really fixing anything in its place. The chiddush here is it's a double dummy lemalacha. It's a two-stage dummy lemalacha. You're fixing something in its place. Let's go with sosa, which is dummy to sosa. You're not really destroying anything, but because halachically it's fixed in its place, it's like a destruction. But even if you genuinely destroyed the keli, it wouldn't be a deraisa if you hold ein stira b'kedim. So there's a two-stage removal from the deraisa. The reason I belabor this point a little bit is because generally Chazal didn't make gezeras for two stages. A gezerah is a ring, a fence around the Torah. Normally the halacha is we don't make a gezerah, a fence around a fence. So if ein stira b'kelim, that min haTorah, destruction of the functionality of a keli is not sosa, then that's one gezerah to say don't destroy a utensil, and then it'd be a second gezerah to say don't make a utensil muktza because that's like destroying a utensil, which is like. So it's a double gezerah, but be that as it may, these are the two views in Rashi. I wanted to add one other point about this. The poskim discussed that the halacha is that if on Yom Tov you're allowed to burn firewood. Now, if you run out on Yom Tov of firewood, can you burn a wooden chair? And the halacha is you're allowed to do that. Now, Yom Tov Eichel Nefesh pushes aside melachos, but it doesn't push aside all melachos. It only pushes aside melachos connected with Eichel Nefesh. Boina and Sosa are not melachos connected with Eichel Nefesh, and therefore normally there's no heter to do binyan on Yom Tov. There's no heter to do stira on Yom Tov. So the Rishonim do ask this as another question, which is if you burn a keli on Yom Tov, l'chora you are doing sosa on the keli. Besides burning it, which is the melach of burning, which is allowed on Yom Tov because it's an Eichel Nefesh type melach, you're also destroying the utensil, which should be sosa according to this theory of Rashi. So I just mentioned that as an aside, since you sort of questioning this, that there's lots of interesting points that come out from this Rashi, including whether it is Boina or Sosa. But either way, this is the view of Rashi that the melacha of the issa of Mevatel ki MeHechano is because of a drabonon of Boina or Sosa. I printed, I think I'm just checking. I printed in my sources also the Pnei Yeshua. I did print this. Yeah. So the Pnei Yeshua speaks about this stira in Rashi. And very briefly, he says that Rashi thinks you need both reasons because neither is sufficient to explain every scenario. Rashi thinks it would be unreasonable to say that it is boina in the case of korim and kasasos, where you're fixing pillows and cushions in the place, because ein derech binyan, you don't. This isn't an object that you do binyan. Even if Chazal would have made a gezerah not to fix things in their places on Shabbos because it looks like boina, that's only with hard objects. It's not with something like a cushion or a pillow, which you don't do binyan with. And therefore Rashi thought boina was insufficient, and therefore Rashi had to come on to sosa because by making a keli muktza, you are destroying the functionality of the keli. Now, Rashi thought that reason alone is also insufficient because in the case where you're using an implement, Keli, to catch drops, you're not destroying its functionality. That is its functionality. It's a bowl. You're there to do many things, including catch drops of oil from dripping lamps. So that you can't say that sosa a kli, that is the functionality of the kli. That's the very functionality of the kli. How can you say it's sosa? So the Pnei Yeshua argues that Rashi had to believe that Bitul Kli MeHechano was the name of a general gezerah, which had two reasons behind it. Very interesting idea in Rashi. But that's how the Pnei Yeshua answers to Rashi. That Rashi thought both reasons were necessary.
Our limit to say functionality is to use it to catch non-mixed items on trash.
So the Pnei Yeshua is a bit of a chiddush. You're right, because you could say, since the Gemara says the first reason the Gemara was ein kli nittel ela l'tzorech davar hanittel, which one way of understanding it meant that a utensil is not made for a non for a use which it's not omed for a Muktza type use. But this answer, in which case you could say there is still Mevatel ki, that Mevatel ki MeHechano is using it for something which it's not omed for. But this answer doesn't hold in that answer. So that evidently this answer understands that the utensil is omed for multiple uses, and when I'm using it to catch drops, that is a use. You can't say that I'm losing the functionality of the utensil. I'm using other functionalities of the utensil, but I'm using it for this. Look, if I take a pot and I put tomatoes in it, it's now being used to store tomatoes. That's not Bittul Ki MeHechano because I'm not using it for cucumbers. I'm using it for tomatoes. So why is this worse? The answer is because I can't use it for anything else because I made it Muktza. Okay, I can't use it for anything else, but I can still use it for this. So the Bnei Shua at least argues that Rashi thought it was unreasonable to call that sosa, and now we had to come on to Bona. Okay, so what we've said so far is two reasons for Mevatel Ki MeHechano: either Bona because you're fixing it in its place, or sosa because you are removing its functionality. The Bnei Yeshua, who says that maybe Bona wouldn't apply with things which aren't normally used for building, maybe sosa wouldn't apply when you're guffa using it for a functionality. And then we had a little bit of discussion about the problems with suggesting sosa as the reason, because there seems to be ein stira b'kelim. You can burn utensils on Yom Tov, and you'll have to say this is some form of double gezerah in which it's not really sosa at all. Even if you were destroying the utensil, it wouldn't be sosa, and therefore this is a double gezerah. That's what we said so far. Now there is I mentioned that there's 4 or 3 explanations that I put on the source sheet. I'd like to hear what you gentlemen hold. There is another Rashi over here, which seems to say yet a different reason, and this is Rashi on our sugya itself. Rashi says, Rashi defines Bittul Ki MeHechano as it was prepared, and now you have made it Muktza. So is this yet a third reason for Mevatel Ki MeHechano, some new prohibition of making things Muktza? How did you learn this, Rashi? Is this a new prohibition of making things Muktza? Rashi said one reason not to do Bittul Ki MeHechano is sosa, one is bona. Is our Rashi on our sugya saying yet another reason because it's making things Muktza? There's a new issa to make things Muktza on Shabbos. Is that what Rashi is saying?
We thought it was just the same as the initial one he says on the Mishnah, or just after the Mishnah on Inami. So because we read it as it's painted the Muktza, and therefore
something else.
It's therefore it's Kaveva bin Komo.
Yeah. So I have to come back, and that's what you were going to say also.
Yeah, it seems effectively the same.
Yeah.
It's not a new concept.
Yeah, it's not a new concept. So I read Rashi like that also. I must say, when I read Rashi, I didn't read too much into this Rashi. I thought all Rashi is explaining is Mevatel Ki MeHechano. Why? Because it becomes Muktza, and therefore there's a problem. What's the problem? Either bona or sosa, like he explains elsewhere. Rashi is explaining stage A. Stage A is if it becomes a bossis, l'davar also, if it catches something Muktza, then it becomes Muktza, and therefore it's bona or sosa. So that was how I read Rashi initially. However, there is that one of the Gedolei Achronim from the most prominent poskim, the Prima Godim, seems to have understood Rashi not like that. He seems to have understood Rashi as saying a new reason of Muktza. So I just mentioned that as an aside. The Prima Godim is not an achron or commentary on Rashi that one can dismiss, as it were. It's I can't emphasize how important the Prima Godim is in Halacha. It's really one of obviously we don't categorize achronim, but really one of the premier halachic sources that is used constantly in halacha, and for reasons which are not entirely clear to me, the Prima Godim seems to take Rashi as a new halach, a new reason, yet a third reason from Mevatel Ki MeHechano. The Rashi held that making things Muktza is osa on Shabbos, not because of bona, not because of sosa, but fundamentally making things Muktza is osa on Shabbos. Now, I struggled with the Prima Godim for 2 reasons. One struggle remains, one I have a resolution of. The one that remains is I don't understand why he read Rashi like that. L'chora is perfectly reasonable to read Rashi. The Rashi is just explaining it becomes Muktza, and therefore it's bona and sosa. However, the Prima Godim doesn't read Rashi like that. I don't really know what to make of it. The second thing I struggled with, what does this mean conceptually? What does it mean that it is that's the problem with making something Muktza? And Baruch Hashem, I saw a source which helped me understand this, and this is a source I printed in source 8 on the source sheet. I'm not a Baki in Sefer Yiraim. I don't want to disillusion anyone. I don't have a habit of going through all Sefer Yiraim, but thankfully we live in a world of modern technology, and we have access to database and so on, and I was scanning my own comments on the Sugya, and I came across the Sefer Yiraim. Now, I'm not going to go into detail what the Sefer Yiraim says, but I think this is beautiful and really, really important. We have a Mishnah which is in Hilchos Muktza. We then seem to have a Gemara which very radically departs from Hilchos Muktza. The first explanation in the Gemara is Mevatel is Ein Davar Nittel Elo L'Sorech Davar Nittel, a new rule that you can't take something for something which was Muktza. It's not Muktza itself; it's just some new rule that you can't move something for something that's not moved. We then have a second Gemara which says Mevatel MeHechano, which again seems to be removed from Muktza. It's a separate halacha of now that it's Muktza, it's called Mevatel MeHechano. The Uraim links them all, and he says Muktza and Mevatel MeHechano are intertwined in their explanation, and Mevatel MeHechano is because of Ein Davar Nittel Elo L'Sorech Davar Nittel. So the Uraim is unreadable, and I think what's going on over here is the same principle as we established before. It's wrong to talk about an item being Muktza or not being Muktza. The better way to talk about it is functionality of items. There are some items which are completely Muktza for everything, but there are items which are semi-Muktza. A Muktza, a Kli Shemalachton Issa. I'm not allowed to move for its prohibited use, but I'm allowed to use, or for its own use, like to save it. I have a hammer that is going to get flooded away, I can't move it, but I can move it for a mutter need, like to break open a walnut or something like that. So Muktza should be thought of as functionality. In the previous sugya we saw, Ein Kli Nittel Elo L'Sorech Davar Nittel meant that this utensil is Muktza with respect to moving it for certain uses, for moving it for the serach of Muktza items. It's not a new rule that you can't move something for a Muktza item, is that the Kli, even a non-Muktza item, is prepared for non-Muktza uses, but is not prepared, it's not made for using to protect other Kelim. The Uraim is saying, and this is, I think, how the Prima Godim is reading Rashi, that making something Muktza is like a more minimalistic version of Ein Davar Nittel. The second opinion the Gemara holds that we don't hold Ein Davar Nittel Elo L'Sorech Davar Nittel. You can move something for the sake of a Muktza item, but to dedicate it for the sake of a Muktza item, that not. So you can take a utensil and put it on top of something where it doesn't become a bosses, it doesn't become Muktza itself. That's not a problem, because we don't hold Ein Kli Nittel Elo L'Sorech Davar Nittel. The second opinion of the Gemara is arguing the first opinion of the Gemara. It doesn't hold that you can't move it for the sake of something Muktza. But to make an object Muktza itself, that by definition means it's not omed for that. The definition of a non-Muktza item is it's omed for lots of tashmishim. But the one thing it can't be omed for is to become Muktza, because the whole point is it's not omed for that. That would be making it into an unprepared item. And therefore Rashi in this reading, or at least to say for Uraim, understood that that Mevatel MeHechano is like a more narrow version of Ein Davar Nittel. To make a Keli Muktza, it's Muktza for that. You can't make a Keli Muktza on Shabbos. That's a Muktza use of a Keli. So again, I'll come to a moment, just to summarize, we've seen that we should more accurately think of things being Muktza with respect to functionality. Let me remind you again, we learned Tosfos at the bottom of the previous Amud, in which Tosfos held that the pshat in the Mishnah of the Ein Yusum Imenu meant it's Muktza with respect to benefiting, but not to tiltal. So something can be Muktza with respect to benefit, but not Muktza with respect to movements. Something can be Muktza with respect to movements. Something can be Muktza with respect to Muktza uses. That's that pshat in Ein Kli Nittel, to use something for the sake of protecting something Muktza, it's not Mukhan for. And in our Gemara we see to make something Muktza, to redefine its ishtamshus for only a Muktza use, that itself would be, it by definition can't be omed to be redefined to be a Muktza use. So in this reading of Rashi, like it or not, but that's how the Prima Godim reads it, where he doesn't think it's saying it's Muktza and therefore there's Boino Sosa, but making it Muktza is its own right. And I think in the Sefer Uraim, who links it to Ein Kli Nittel, what they're saying is that making something Muktza is translation of making something Muktza, dedicating the use of the utensil for something that is Muktza is by definition that you can't do that on Shabbos, because even a non-Muktza item is Muktza with respect to at least one thing, which is making it Muktza itself. Because the whole point is it's an appliance, a utensil. It's omed for all use. It can't be omed for a non-use. That's a contradiction. That with respect to that, it's always Muktza. Okay, pause for questions. Yes.
Someone would learn Mishnah.
Yeah.
If you look at it, it says the any item.
Yeah.
There's push up shop. Why does Mishnah say that? Obviously, if you had it yesterday.
Great question. I'm not going to talk about it now because it's off topic. Listen, yeah. As Ein Yusum, I'm not going to go into it again because
The second Shabbos coming in, that Keli's Muktza, that's happening.
It's caught up in the Tosus. It was the Shiur you missed because you were preparing for the Hachnas Torah, which I should say Mazel Tov to you, by the way. It's a beautiful achievement. Listen to the recording of the Shiur and then we'll speak about it. I'm just in the interest of time, given that we haven't had the Shiur for ages, I'm sort of powering through. You're right, but only in one reading of the Mishnah, and it gets caught up in the discussion of Tosus. So it's not a bad point, but it's too far a subject for me to focus on it. Yeah.
We haven't quite got to read, so isn't it that maybe Rashi's bringing in the Muktza element because it's with Yitzchak, who argues with the Christian Rabbi Yosef. So Uraim is just bringing Kaiman on for Yitzchak, and Rashi, when he quotes Muktza, is also saying Kaiman for Yitzchak. That's not necessarily the two pshatim earlier.
I don't think that's a good pshat in the Uraim. I think it's potentially a good pshat in Rashi, and I'm going to come to that in a moment. But according to the Prima Godim, who learns that Rashi is giving an independent reason, you'd have to say something. The Prima Godim is picturing something like what I'm up. Let's go 2 stages, just to avoid confusion in here. Whether we think this reads well into Rashi or not, whether you think I'm right in the Uraim or not, I'm suggesting a new conceptual explanation of Mevatel MeHechano, which is a nice explanation. Point number 1. Point number 2, the Uraim who thinks that Rashi is a freestanding, the Prima Godim who thinks that Rashi is a freestanding explanation of Mevatel MeHechano must be saying something like I'm saying. Whether I've got it exactly right or not, you can agree. But if the Prima Godim reads Rashi as saying that this is in and of in itself the reason for Mevatel MeHechano, he must be saying that making something Muktza on Shabbos is a problem. That's what Rashi. That's how he's reading Rashi, because you have to do something and that is more or less in lines with what I'm saying. So whether your reading is a good reading in Rashi or not, and I think it's a great reading in Rashi, by the way, I don't understand the Prima Godim, but that's something like that's how the Prima Godim is reading it. Point number 2. Point number 3, I don't think your explanation is a good explanation of the Uraim. Even if it works in Rashi, it doesn't work in the Uraim, because the Uraim says that this depends on Mevatel MeHechano. Now the Uraim is not getting into the discussion of, it depends on Kli Nittel. He's not getting into Hilchas Muktza over here. Everyone agrees that there is a concept of Muktza on Shabbos. And everyone agrees that this becomes at least the Halacha, everyone agrees this becomes a bossis. So how is he tying it up to more generic Hilchas Muktza? True, but why is he bringing that into Mevatel MeHechano? Who asked him to mix 2 different sugyas? In the Mevatel MeHechano is built on 2 stages. Number 1, that when you put something under a kli to catch a drop, it becomes Muktza. That's stage number 1. Stage number 2 is, and that's a problem. And the Uraim seems to say the problem is it becoming Muktza. So that's inescapable. So just to summarize, we have a Rashi that says the reason for Mevatel MeHechano is because it becomes Muktza. One way of reading Rashi is period. That's it. Just making it Muktza is the reason for the prohibition. That's how the Prima Godim understood it. In which case we have to say what I think is what the Uraim is saying. Also, but leave the Uraim or don't, like the Uraim or don't like what I'm saying in the Uraim. But conceptually, making something Muktza is a problem on Shabbos, in and of in itself, with no further explanation needed. I think that means that's because it's not muchen for that use. That's my suggestion. Alternative way of reading Rashi is that Rashi is saying it becomes Muktza, and therefore his previous explanations apply. The truth is, I actually understand even more than that, and this gets to your point, Jeffrey. I actually understand even more than that why Rashi is bringing in Muktza over here. And there's 2 reasons. First of all, let's not forget it's not obvious that it does become Muktza. How do we know that when I put something onto something else, it becomes Muktza? And that's just because there's a sugya of bosses. But have we yet met the sugya of bosses? Do we know the sugya? Rashi's job is to be a mafarish, to tell us the commentary of all the things we need to know. So Rashi is simply telling us it becomes a bosses, it becomes Muktza. More than that, there is a minority opinion amongst the Rishonim, this is a piece of outside knowledge, but that holds it, that bosses doesn't make sense on Shabbos. We had a little bit of a discussion about this in the last year, about whether things can become Muktza on Shabbos and how that works. But the Balamor is of the view that bosses is a concept at the beginning of Shabbos. At the beginning of Shabbos, you're defining functionality. If something is a bosses or also, it becomes Muktza at the beginning of Shabbos. Something becomes a bosses in the middle of Shabbos, it doesn't become Muktza. It has Muktza sitting on top of it. It doesn't become, how does it magically become Muktza itself just because it's underneath something? So I'm not expecting any of us at this point now to understand all of Hilchas bosses. I'm simply saying that the whole sugya is built on a hidden assumption, which is that when something is underneath something else, it becomes Muktza. It's Rashi's job as a mafarish to explain that. So the Prima Godim is a wonder to me. Rashi's just doing what you would want a commentary to be. We all, thankfully, vaguely know, we all know Hilchas Shabbos, we vaguely know something called bosses. Hashem, one day the chaburah will be also non-Hilchas bosses, but we know there's something called bosses, we read the Mishnah, but Rashi's job is mafarish, his job to explain bosses. And the truth is, there's a minority Rishon who didn't even agree with this whole concept of something becoming a bosses on Shabbos. So this is point number 1. Point number 2, there's a lomdisha point over here, conceptual point over here. That in order to say it's boina or soisa, in order to say that it is boina or soisa, you have to say that fundamentally it becomes Muktza. You and I could dream up tons of scenarios where you shouldn't move things on Shabbos, and I don't think any of them would be called Mevatel Kli MeHechano. They're just incidental things. And the Poskim, by the way, give examples of such things. And I'll give two examples. Again, this is not my own ideas. This is from an Avnei Nezer. Avnei Nezer gives two examples of such things. He says, imagine I have a Keli in a window, blocking a window, and a candle burning. Now, I can't move the Keli out of the window because that will allow a gust of wind to come in and blow out the candle. That's the Halacha. So he says, would I call that Mevatel Kli MeHechano because I can't move it? And the answer is, he doesn't say this, but l'chorah we would say no. Because it's incidental. It's not that this has fundamentally become a fixed object. It's just, I can't move it. If you want to use Yeshiva language, it's in the governor, not the chafta. The object is not Muktza. The object's not immobile. I can't move it because I can't move the object and risk blowing out the candle. But the object itself isn't an unmovable object. The chiddush of Muktza is that chafta, the object, has got new attributes, which mean it can't be moved. That is Bono and Sosa. But me, I can't move the object because I can't move it because of some external halacha. That doesn't make it fixed in its place. This is one example. And the other example that Avnei gives is moving a Keli. He says, I shouldn't put a Keli on a tree on Shabbos because if I put it on the tree on Shabbos, if it weighs down the branch, I won't be able to take it off because that will cause the movement of the tree. And I'm not allowed to move a tree on Shabbos. And again, we would say the same chiluk. We say that's not called Mevatel Kli MeHechano. The object doesn't become unmovable. I can't. In the language of the Olam Yeshivas, it's called Gavra and Chefsa. Gavra is the human, the person. Chefsa is the chayfet, the object. The object hasn't become unmovable. I can't move the object because I can't move a tree. I can't do it. The object hasn't become Muktza. That's not Mevatel Kli MeHechano. So I'm just adding this in as a second reason why Rashi has to say it's Muktza. Rashi explains to us the chiddush of bosses isn't that I can't move something because by moving it I'll move the object inside it. Even if I can move the under object somehow without moving the object inside it, the chiddush of bosses is that it's become subsumed to the object on top of it. This is the chiddush of bosses. Why does something underneath something else become bosses? Because I've put it there to serve the Muktza item. It's become the slave of the Muktza object. Therefore, its functionality has become narrowed into that of being the receptacle for a Muktza object, so it becomes Muktza. It's not that I can't move it because I might be moving an Muktza object, like the Keli in the window or the object sitting on the bough, on the branch of a tree. It has become Muktza. And this is what Rashi is telling us. Rashi is teaching us as a mafarish, the poshut thing, which is there's some halacha called bosses, it becomes Muktza. And if we want to add in, if we want to be more conceptual, he's teaching us a conceptual point that it has become Muktza, which isn't obvious till you learn bosses. You may not understand this. Let me give you an example of this. The halacha is, this is halacha l'maisa. If I have, before Shabbos, a bowl, and I put in the bowl my money and my car keys and the like, the bowl becomes bosses. It's Muktza on Shabbos. If before Shabbos I accidentally left something Muktza on top of something non-Muktza, so I have my folders up shirts and I dump my phone on top of it without thinking or accidentally leave it there, the shirts do not become bosses. Because the whole lomdas of bosses is that I've assigned this, it's a Muktza type halacha. I've assigned its use to be the receptacle of Muktza items. And therefore it itself is redefined functionality to become bosses. Something happening to sit on something else, it doesn't become Muktza. It may be I can't move my shirt because I have no way of moving the object without moving my shirt, without also moving the Muktza item. But if I could do that, or if someone would remove it, then it wouldn't be Muktza, the shirt's not Muktza. So the chiddush of bosses is that placing something under something else makes it Muktza. And only in that case does the concept of Mevatel Kli MeHechano make sense. Because then I've genuinely redefined the purpose of the object, and therefore Rashi says it's like Bona and Sosa. Then it's, if you like, a din in the chayfetz. I've remade the chayfetz. I've done a binyan or a stira in the chayfetz itself. Otherwise, if you didn't hold of this chiddush of bosses, then it wouldn't become Muktza. It wouldn't be called Mevatel Kli MeHechano. So just to summarize what we've said so far, we've seen 2.5 reasons for Mevatel Kli MeHechano. One reason is Bona, one reason is Sosa, these are explicit in Rashi. Then there's a new reason called making something Muktza. The Pri Megadim learns that's Peshat in Rashi, that making something Muktza is Mevatel Kli MeHechano. The Pri Megadim, the Sefer Yirain seems to say a similar idea. We can quibble over whether this is what Rashi means or not. We can defer Rashi, we can defect the diuk from Rashi in 3 stages. So Rashi is just explaining the basis, that the first stage, and it becomes Muktza, therefore it's bonus. So he just doesn't bother telling us the next stages. So Rashi is saying conceptually, factually, no, there's a halacha called bosses. You may never met the halacha of bosses, becomes Muktza, and Rashi can be speaking lomdishly, conceptually, and he can be saying a piece of lomdas. It itself becomes Muktza. It's not just as a problem with moving it, an incidental problem, but it's been redefined as a Muktza item in its own right. Just for the sake of completion, the fourth and final reason for bosses is the Ritva printed in source 6. He says the problem is because of covered Shabbos. Removing utensils out of use is a diminution of miyut for covered Shabbos, because I no longer have access to this Keli. You shouldn't reduce covered Shabbos by removing Kelim out of circulation. I guess in a world in which there were very few implements, now we live in a world where we have so much. In a world of few implements, it would impede your covered Shabbos if you can no longer access a Keli. Therefore, the Ritva says this is the problem. To summarize, 4 reasons or 3 reasons, depending on you like Prima Godom, we'll call it 4 reasons because Prima Godom is a prominent place sake for Mevatel ki MeHechano. Homework over Ben Osmanim is nafkaminas between these reasons. Can you think of distinctions in halacha between these reasons? Some of these nafkaminas are quite esoteric, but some of them really, if you just run through Hilchos Shabbos, you may come up with some of the nafkaminas. And Mi'etz Hashem, we will resume learning, Adam, whenever we put on the WhatsApp group, I can't remember the date. We'll resume learning again, and the first share that I will give will be a continuation of Mevatel ki MeHechano, with the nafkaminas between the reasons, and then I'll try and give more sources for us to move on. I know we sat in the sukkah because I was away. We sat in the sukkah a little longer than we should have. So Mi'etz Hashem will move on after that. And I wish everyone, those who are online and those who are here, if I don't see you, a kosher Pesach and a good Pesach, and v'nochal shaman az vachim, and we should be bezeicha to eat from the karbanos of Pesach. Mi'etz Hashem.
Yeah.